Hi, I'm Pastor Dave and welcome to this week's video. Well, have you heard what's happening in Zimbabwe? Bloomberg just reported that commercial banks in Zimbabwe will soon be forced to accept livestock, cattle, goats, sheep, as collateral for cash loans to businesses. Have you heard about this? Now think about this. What they're calling this is due to a new law being called the Movable Property Security Interest Bill. Now this cash crunch in Zimbabwe, where several banks are limiting customers' withdrawals. So you're having financial issues in South Africa, and having customers being limited in financial withdrawals. That's not the first time we've seen that happen in Greece, happen in Cyprus, happen in Australia to some extreme, not as bad as in Greece and Cyprus. So we've seen it before. Canada put in their budget, not bailouts, but bail-ins, where if they need money, they can go into customers' account. That's actually in the Canadian budget. It was page 150 of last year's budget. So what's happening in Zimbabwe is not new. It just takes it to a different level. If you have a TV set or a computer or even a refrigerator, you can bring that to the bank, or the bank will put that in a registry, and that becomes collateral. Now think about businesses that have to bring in cattle or sheep or goats. Livestock is a valuable asset, and they're using this for business loans to businesses. Now individuals are under the same thing, which I understand somewhat, but to businesses, that changes the whole ball game there. Now this is South Africa. So the question is this an isolated situation, or is this a foreshadow of what's to come? Could other parts of the world follow in this? Now what's been the history of Zimbabwe and their central bank system? 2 years ago, in 2015, June of 2015, Fox reported on this. And they said that Zimbabwe their commercial bank was going to allow citizens at that time to turn in old Zimbabwe currency for current U.S. dollars. They had a window of time 2 years ago to turn in the currency which was no longer being used and to exchange it for U.S. dollars. Currency, I went on eBay. Currency on eBay, you can get some Zimbabwe currency. Again, it's no longer being accepted, but it's still out there, I guess, for collectors or what have you. But I went on eBay and I found a $100 trillion bill, Zimbabwe banknote. $100 trillion Zimbabwe banknote. That's a 1 with 14 zeros behind it. What do you think it's going for on eBay? Before this video, I checked on it, and you could buy that for $41. 41 American dollars, and you could put in a frame a $1 trillion bill from Zimbabwe and hang that in your home or office, I guess. Now, the Zimbabwe dollar once held high value. In fact, it was more valuable than the U.S. dollar at one point. In April of 1980 was when Zimbabwe started to make their own money, their own banknotes. And they did them in denominations between $2 and $20. So I'm only taking you back, 35, 37 years in the 80s. Their dollar was strong. It was even stronger than the American dollar. But what happened? That was 1980. In the 1990s, things started to really go downhill. They did land reform, they did money reform, they changed things around. It affected currencies, it affected farms, it affected business, and things started to really go downhill very quickly. So from 1980 into the 90s, you had problems, and then when you get to the 2000s, Zimbabwe is really hurting. This is where inflation kicks in. Now, because of inflation, the government began printing currency, denominations, in $500 bills up to $1,000 bills. So from the 80s, you're okay. The 90s, you have a little problem. By 2001 to 2005, they're printing larger bills. But it gets much worse than that. August 1st of 2006, the government begins to begin this currency reform. So keep that in mind, August of 2006. July of 2007, almost a year later, not quite a year, but almost a year later, they create a $500,000 banknote, the $500,000 Zimbabwe currency. Now, the exchange rate for that was worth about 16 US dollars. So just think about that. A $500,000 bill In America, it's worth about $16. In December of that same year, 5 months later, December 31st of 2007, the government issued a $750,000 banknote. A $750,000 dollar banknote. Now, why are they doing this in such large numbers? You have to understand that the $1 trillion Zimbabwe note, it was worth about 40 cents in America when this comes out. Inflation at this in Zimbabwe hit 230 million%. Think about that. I mean, how do you even fathom that? 230 million% was the inflation. So because the inflation kept going up and kept going up, they had to print denominations to keep up with it. So December 31st, 2007, you have the first $750,000 bill, $750,000. 1 day later, you get the $1 million note. January 1st of 2008, keep that in mind, that date, 2008, January 1st, the next day, the government introduces the $1 million banknote, the $5 million, and the $10 million banknote. So you can pull out a bill for that, and the value on it says 10 million Zimbabwe dollars. A few months later, in April 2nd of 2008, the $25 million note and the $50 million note are created. All right, time out. What do you do with a $50 million banknote? What can you buy with that? If you were to buy a t-shirt in Zimbabwe in April of 2008, it would cost you roughly $276 million. $276 million. If you wanted a pair of pants, that would run you $2.5 billion with a B. Inflation, again, going up 230 million%. So if you want a pair of pants, you got to count out, $2.5 billion for that. In May of 2008, the very next month, because of the annual inflation rate, it's now reaching over 100,000% per month, basically. And so Zimbabwe's government is forced to produce the $100 million, the $250, and the $500 million banknote. Now, again, it's worth dollars, just a few dollars in American money. But you can see inflation, what's happening, it's costing you something. In May of 2008, just 2 weeks later, the $5 billion note, the $25 billion note, and the $50 billion banknote is released. Billions. So in January of 2008, you have millions. In May of 2008, you have billions. July 1st, the $100 billion note is released. What do you buy with $100 million in Zimbabwe in July of 2008? You could buy approximately 3 eggs. 3 eggs. $100 billion. In January of 2009, just 6 months later, they introduced the $10 trillion note, the $20 trillion note, the $50 trillion note, and here you go, the $100 trillion note. That's a 1 with 14 zeros, which you can buy right now on eBay for $41. That comes out in January 16th of 2009, and then by February, everything is over. By February, Zimbabwe is forced to go to a foreign currency. The inflation is too much, and the Zimbabwe dollar is done. So basically from July of 2007, really 2008, January of 2008 to February of 2009, in a matter of 13 months, everything collapsed. So now when you look at that, again, was this just Zimbabwe? Now you go from there, from the money collapsing to today, if businesses are going to borrow money from the central bank in Zimbabwe, you've got to bring your cattle in, or your goats, or your sheep, or your TV, or whatever asset you may have. But the bank is forced to take livestock now. Now, I mean, just think about this. What is a cow worth? You know, when you bring it in, how old is the cow? How healthy is the cow? And what happens over time if that cow is not producing as much milk as it did when you brought it in, or if it gets ill? The value goes down. You can see where this is going to create chaos and lead to further destruction. So there's issues in South Africa. Now, when you look at this, you got to say, is this just an isolated event, or is this a foreshadow of what's happening? You know, when you look at Zimbabwe, which used to be, again, a very strong economy, you have Venezuela and what's happening there. Venezuela used to be a very oil-rich economy, but now people can't even buy food. People sometimes go months without the basics, without milk and flour, without things like toilet paper, medicines. They can't get medicines. Hospitals are collapsing in Venezuela because they can't get basic medicine. And because of that, people are actually dying just because they can't get the medicine, the basic medical needs that they have. Every day, parents are just hoping to have enough food to feed their children. And many days, people go hungry in Venezuela. And Argentina is not too far behind, and neither is the European Union. The EU really isn't that far behind with chaos. So when you look at that, so these examples of just, is this an extreme example what's going on in Zimbabwe, or is it something that could become more global and nationwide? CNN Money, just last week, April 28th of 2017, they came out and said, hey, here's the problem with Venezuela. Basically you had the banks yielding to the government doing price control, and so on and so forth, and you see the destruction that it led to. So you got Zimbabwe, you got Venezuela, you got Argentina, you got the EU, not as bad, but heading down that path. Where does it end and what happens? Now again, are these just drastic illustrations? Is this just a drastic example? Or could America ever get to this point? I'll let you think about that. Anyhow, I wanted to bring the Zimbabwe situation to your forefront. I'm not seeing much being talked about it. If you want more information on this or articles like this, there's other radio shows, there's articles that we keep you up to date on the website. The website is Interpreting the Times. If you Google that, it's all one word, interpretingthetimes.com. I would love to hear from you, but between just now and the next time we get back together, spend some time and look what's going on in the world, especially financially, because that has a domino effect. And the question is, how many dominoes will fall? Anyhow, that's our video for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless you.